Amazing. Welcome, welcome everybody, beautiful, beautiful humans, to the University of the Underground. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And we are the Moon Arkestra, and this is the incredible Whistleblowing Residency. Yay! I think we should all have a collective whistleblow. Yes, thank you so much for being here, for sharing space and spirit. We are gonna be riffing off different notions of whistleblowing as a political collective act, and also as a literal way of making music, of communicating different kind of knowledges, different ways of being in community together, both physically, literally, and metaphysically. And today we have the absolutely incredible, beautiful, amazing, radical, socialist spirit, Kayleigh Walsh, with us today. Now, Kayleigh is many things, and with all of these introductions, it seems reductive. Do you know what I mean? How can 30 seconds ever encapsulate the fullness and the abundance that someone is? But Kayleigh is a very inspiring soul and moves with a radical sense of social consciousness wherever she is. She's a deep lover of music, and music in the ways in which it can be instrumentalized for revolutionary consciousness. She is part of many different kind of communities, many different cooperatives. Her kind of life work is about kind of reimagining and reconfiguring the ways in which we can be together with equity, with justice, with care, with deep support, with compassion. And she always carries that fire in her belly wherever she is. And like we were saying before, having that integrity is really, really rare. And it's the thread that connects us, that connects all of us in this space together, and all of the speakers that we've had so far. I remember, being blown away by Kayleigh's love and deep appreciation of Brazilian music. And it was her love for this music that inspired her to study Brazilian Portuguese at university, so she could understand what the music was talking about, even though her spirit knew what the music was talking about. And I think there's something interesting in that, and we're talking about decolonizing knowledge, and kind of bringing other types of knowing into the space. Our spirits, our emotions can speak in vernaculars that kind of transcend linguistics. And I guess music is it's corny to say, but it is the universal language in many different ways, and it enables us to kind of to transcend the limitations of borders, of boundaries that have been imposed on us and that we may have constructed. And so in honor of boundary breaking, boundary rupturing, boundary kind of destruction, I bring the beautiful Kayleigh Walsh to the space. Thank you so much for being here, Kayleigh.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here. And I always say, if you ever need a little boost, just ask Aditi to introduce you to someone. And oh my gosh, the praises. Thank you, Aditi. It's a lot of love. So I never ever thought I would be this person, but I have created slides because my brain and my mind, in full honesty, is here, there and everywhere at the moment, and I need them to focus me. But I'm not going to share my screen, because I'll share my screen to show you a couple of things in a minute, but I'm just going to put them in the chat in case you want to look at them. But also, if you're I don't want to look at slides, that's fine. You do whatever feels right. But my stream of consciousness is a ping pong ball at the best of times, so I just need this to keep me focused. So I've called this, I'm going to jump straight in as well, because I have quite a lot and I want to be able to I want to kind of do it justice, but also give people space towards the end. So I'm going to jump straight in. So basically, I've called this whistleblowing as workers, and I've been intentionally vague with this title, because I think we're very, like the age that we're living in now, when we hear that workers are whistleblowing, what we're used to is, and what's almost expected is that something has happened to workers in some way and they are whistleblowing against their employer. And like we hear stuff about this all the time, but really what I'm talking about today is the capacity and the ability to be a whistleblower as a worker. So through the work that we do and the structures that lend themselves to that being possible. So I'm going on to slide 2. Just if you are looking at slides, if you're not, it's all good. But basically what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about shareholder structures as a way to control workers. Whistle stop, cheesy pun, tour of worker cooperatives, so you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. The work that we do, where I work, how we survive as a group, and like lessons that I've learned. And just like another point is that I understand and I recognize in myself that I can be quite simplistic at times about things, especially when I have a strong opinion about stuff. So if you feel comfortable, like challenge me, like critique what I'm saying, it's all good. But also if you don't feel comfortable to do that, like I'm not going to try and push people to do that. Okay, so jumping into slide 3. Basically shareholder structures as a way to control workers. So like, what do I mean by this? And I'm going to go straight into slide 4, which basically is that the funny thing about shareholders is they do no work, they do zero work, which is nuts for the amount of power and kind of like priority that they hold in companies that have shareholders. And so like, what is a shareholder? So basically this is like neoliberalism's answer to running a company, which like in itself is enough to like question it and know that it is shady, because neoliberalism is not good for anyone apart from like the sprinkling of like the ruling class on top. But basically there is an emphasis on running a company on a shoestring so that you can pay out as much money as possible to shareholders. But workers, i.e. the people who are delivering all of the work, are exploited, they're unsupported, and they're largely ignored, which is like, if we wrote this down, I always give this really silly analogy, but I love it, so I don't care. If an alien, right, came to this planet and you like gave them this list, they'll be like, that makes no sense. Like, how did that even come about? Because it is a total fuckery basically on workers, and it's an intentional fuckery. So shareholding companies don't want to rock the boat in any way, because it might affect the share price. They're not political and they don't want to speak to power. They want to continue and perpetuate this status quo because that is what is in their best interest. But really what that means for us is that, and the thing is that when I'm talking about workers, but I'm also talking about people who are like on the end of a service. So when we think about our trains, our internet, our phone line, our gas, our electricity, like basically everything that we use to stay alive, is owned by shareholders. And so the quality of work that we receive is really low. The motivation among workers is low, and the innovations, the kind of like pushing of boundaries and what could be, is also low, because that costs money, right? Like that, you know, there's no taking out of the profit margins basically in this scenario. And it becomes really poisonous, and just kind of this like status quo as poisonous. So the situation that we're in at the moment with gas and electricity companies, for example, that like my electricity and gas direct debit has gone from £40 to £110 a month. Shareholders are still being paid out dividends, like they hit the last. Everything is done, all the structure is put in protection of shareholders, which is like, again, like they do no work, like, you know, it's just insane. So I just want to kind of paint that picture of like, of the reality that we're living in at the moment. And the thing is that if you take one thing away from this talk, what I want you to know is that the way that most companies and that work is structured, like in this world, like generally speaking at the moment, is really messed up, but there is an alternative. Like, it's not all doom and gloom. So on slide 5, I have a quick question. Does anyone know what a worker co-op is? Okay, so like nobody's jumping on unmute straight away. What I'm gonna say is not all of you know what it is, right? So a worker cooperative is basically a company that the workers own and control together. And so I work at a worker cooperative. But before I kind of get into that a little bit more, I'm going to just try and like give you like paint the picture of the demise of workers' rights. So that's on slide 6. So basically, they used to be called what were called cooperative development agencies all over the country. So basically, these agencies, it's, you know, like an office that you could go to. You could go to this place and find out how you could collaborate as a worker with people who worked in a similar field as you. And you get funding, you would get support, you would get advice, and that was all government funded until Thatcher was elected. So, you know, Thatcher, like famous for saying that society doesn't exist, like her focus on individualism, she made sure that she got rid of that more or less straight away. So like as soon as she was elected Prime Minister. And her era just generally brought an end to worker organisation and solidarity. So it wasn't just worker co-ops she was after. She went after unions. She went after any large scale organising. And funnily enough, her kind of like cronies in other countries did something very similar. So I'm half Chilean, and the dictatorship over there did the same. Like worker co-ops, straight away, they just cut them off. And there was an emphasis on self-employed people who are, first of all, in competition with each other, and second of all, have very, very few rights. So if you think to how people were supported during furlough, even though self-employed like status is not a new thing, people were so vulnerable during that time. This demise of workers' rights paved the way for privatization and then for shareholders. So everything basically used to be publicly owned. Gas, electricity, water, trains, like, you know, it's almost hard to think about what the world would look like in that sense, but that's how it used to be. But it was all chopped up and sold off. And New Labour finished whatever she started. So I'm also not saying this is like the Conservatives have only done this, like Labour have definitely, you know, like crossed the T's and dotted the I's kind of thing in terms of getting rid of workers' rights. And there was New Labour, what they brought in was a shift to social enterprise. So social enterprises are great. Like they have, I think they have like a legal requirement to give at least 50% of their profits to the community, but there's still an interesting lack of kind of desire to basically give too much emphasis on workers and too much emphasis on worker control and power. And why is this? It's basically because worker co-ops are powerful. They challenge the mainstream ideals of what work is and who controls the way that we work. So on slide 7, just to kind of start giving you a bit more context about what worker co-op is and how it functions, anyone can set up as a worker co-op. And there on slide 7, there are like the 7 cooperative principles, which are like the basic kind of foundations of what a co-op is signing up to. So there's voluntary and open membership, which means that they can't be like selective. They can't like, it's not like I can be a member and a DT can't. If we're both workers and we can both have like the same access to membership. Democratic member control, so there's no like secret power moves going on. We all understand how we control our business together. Member economic participation, which basically means that we're all paid for our work and we all have an equitable stake in our work. In the worker co-op that I work at, we have a 3-to-1 pay ratio, which means nobody gets paid 3 times anyone else. And our cleaner is included in that because she creates a safe and clean space for us to work. So she gets paid in that same ratio. Autonomy and independence, so freedom to explore what and how you work. You know, like if we think about like what I've been referring to as shareholder companies or even just hierarchical companies, a lot of the time workers are pigeonholed into a certain role and they're not allowed to explore anything outside of that. Education, training and information. So like as a worker, like being able to get better at your job, but a lot of the time this is suppressed for people because if you get better, then you should get paid more. So there's like an intentional kind of bureaucratic layer of people not being able to extend their skills. Cooperation among cooperatives. So cooperatives don't compete for work. They like, you know, lend each other a hand if needed. And we are part of, the place that I work, are part of a network of digital worker co-ops all over the country. So it means that we can collaborate and scale up and deliver good work without having like the overhead of or desire of being a massive company. And lastly, the concern for community as well. So like looking after whoever is living outside, you know, like when you leave your door, who is out there and looking after those people. So that's just a kind of frame. Like, I think worker co-ops are really great. And I'm going to critique them in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to give you, because I know that awareness, even in progressive spaces, is really low of what worker co-ops are. And that's all by design, kind of given what I've just been going through. So slide 8 is just the kind of basics of what happens if workers don't have rights and if they don't have a say in their company. So like, how can they be expected to tell the truth in the first place? So the truth about their working conditions, about pay, about overwork or free labor, which just seems to be a given in so many spaces. Racism, sexism, ableism, like all the bad isms and schisms, lack of upward mobility, so this kind of intentional suppression of people. And also when we think about how people start to like resist this, like what are the consequences of workers telling the truth as well? So like the space that we're in, especially in this country now, is that life is so expensive that a lot of people, like, you know, they have no choice. They kind of have to keep their head down and keep going through this because they got bills to pay and they got children to feed. I think there is a shift happening, which is that we're seeing like a unionization on scales that we haven't seen in this country for at least 30 years. And the same in the States as well, like their capacity to organize, and like, you know, unions being set up in Amazon branches is like, this time 3-4 years ago would have been unheard of. So we're making big moves, but there's still a lot to go. Slide 9 is just posing this question: what happens when we choose what and how we work? So basically, me working in a worker cooperative has afforded me that space with my comrades. Slide 10 is saying, for me, ownership and control is key. Like, I think ownership and control is the starting point for everything else to follow. There's kind of like, when I've mentioned social enterprises already, there are these, they're called employee-owned organizations. Like, these are just kind of like the watering down, I personally think, of like true worker rights. And so I think when you own it and you are able to control it, that is the place where workers should be. And I haven't even told you what I do yet. So I work at a cooperative called Outlandish, and we are in the tech space. I want you to know as well, when I say that in the same breath, that I am not tech-centric, I am not technical, and I never had a desire to work in technology. I just kind of fell into this and I was like, oh my God, what has happened? How did I, like, what am I doing here? But I quickly found that I enjoyed the freedom of being able to explore things that I didn't even know I was good at. And also just this kind of trust that I was kind of afforded very, very quickly, based on the fact that like I could roll my sleeves up and get stuck in. So basically that's why I stuck around. And it was kind of that, but also the stuff that we work on. So I'm going to show you real quick just the kind of stuff that we've been able to work on, based on us not having to answer to any shareholders, any bosses, anyone that can tell us like, no, you can't work on this stuff. So this is where I am going to share my screen just to go through some things real quick. So is this speed okay for everybody? Because I'm just kind of talking at you. Okay. Thank you. So this is a website called School Cuts. This website basically started off, we paid for the kind of first couple of iterations with our own money. And the kind of basis of this is that the government used to release all of the cuts that they made to schools on a CSV and stick it on some part of the government website and be like, yeah, we published this data, but it was never accessible. Like, God knows how people would find it. And also when you did find it, you'd have to be like a data scientist to understand what was going on. So one of the people that I was working with at the time had gone to a meeting about this, and I don't know why he went, he didn't even have kids at the time, but he was just curious about what was going on. And he was like, listen, we can build you a website to kind of show this to the public. So it's a very, very basic premise where you put in your postcode or a school name. I bet it's going to take ages when I'm doing a live demo. It is, my internet is really dodgy. So it is faster than this, come on website. And basically all of these minus pounds on the map that you see are schools losing money. And so this is my school here that I went to. Prendergast. And you can see that the shortfall from in 2021 to 2022 is £484,000. And what that means on a per pupil basis as well. So that's like £784 less per pupil per year. And then the impact in Lewisham, am I still here? Yeah, sorry, I'm getting messages that my internet is unstable. The impact in Lewisham being that this is a £25 million shortfall, and that 73 out of 76 schools in Lewisham are still considered in crisis. So this is like quite, this is like I don't know what iteration we're on of this website. Like I've been managing this website since I started at Outlandish, which is like over 6.5 years. But in the first, in the snap election in 2017, this website managed to swing about 795,000 votes away from the Tories, because we had a version of it where we managed to look at the manifestos and compare like for like what their plans for schools were, and show like basically how much they were pledging, how much each mainstream political party were pledging to schools. And at the time, Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, and his was the only manifesto that was pledging money to schools. So even when like the Lib Dems, for example, were going out and saying like, we'll support schools, like in actual fact, they were still going to make cuts. And the only reason that we were able to start that website and to continue to maintain it was because we don't have to answer to any bosses about this is too political or this, that, and the other. And we've got loads of coverage in like the Times and all the shitty right-wing newspapers about, you know,
Oh, I think we've lost you, Kayleigh.
Oh, I'm back. I'm back.
We lost you.
Sorry.
We lost you at all the shitty newspapers.
Yeah. Beliefs, but they couldn't discredit our work because it was all based on government data. We also did a version for NHS cuts, which was funded with Momentum, which had like the very, very same like kind of basis behind it. Basically, this kind of approach to campaigning went like mainstream, and like loads of people were getting in touch with us saying, we've got this data set, we've got that, like could you make us a campaigning website? Because the amount of people that were tweeting it, like it was a very, very simple kind of and digestible way for people to access data. And we tried to kind of play around with it with other data sets and just kind of other campaigns, and it wasn't quite as clear cut. A couple of other examples are, let's see, I don't know if this one's going to work because this has got loads and loads of stuff. Is not you, get out of the way. Colonial Syndrome, which is a website that we made based on Papua New Guinea, and the kind of history of Papua New Guinea being that Australia is such a heavyweight in mining that it had come out and basically like murdered hundreds and hundreds of local people in order to get to mines. And this history was just completely covered up, like mostly funded by the Australian government. So we built them a website that basically allows people, they've kind of accumulated and archived their own history, and we have managed to record it in a kind of multimedia basis, so like videos, documents that have been scanned and that kind of thing, so people can learn about their own history, because when we know that through colonization these things are just wiped out in favor of profit, and you know that's definitely not okay. We've also, get out of the way, little share thingy. We've also got, can you see this PNGI that I've just moved on to? So PNGI, for example, again, based in Papua New Guinea is pretty corrupt, it would turn out. But basically the stuff that this exposed led to the Prime Minister resigning, because the amount of corruption that was kind of like put out and evidence was just too much to come back from. So we've managed to get rid of like one head of state, which is great. And then stuff like the the Great British Housing ripoff as well. So this is in partnership with Unison. So basically this is focusing on like frontline workers, like key workers. So the idea is that you put in your income. So let's say like £17,000, which is not, which like the craziness that we're living in. There would be people like nurses earning that amount of money. I'll put in my postcode, and it basically gives you an idea of how long it would take based on that salary to be able to save for a deposit in Lewisham, kind of based on like the affordability of what you can save. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of the kind of stuff that we're able to work on. I also have like Jeremy Corbyn's website in there. So obviously like Jeremy Corbyn, there was a time, there still is a time when no one would touch him, you know, his work, like anything to do with him with a barge pole, because of all the politics and all of the kind of I guess like just like the kind of exposure that it will come with. Whereas we were like, yeah, well, we built him his website way before he was Labour leader, but we maintained it. And funny enough, the amount of attacks that he got from the Russians was just like hilarious in a way. And then we also have stuff like Space 4, which is probably one of the most affordable co-working spaces before co-working spaces were cool, in London, which is a space that we run. You can get like a full-time seat for £200 per month, and it's like a physical space. You can come and learn about cooperatives and like hang out with people, and like there'll be a designer over there, or there'll be like a data analyst over there, and a way for people to collaborate and deliver projects that they need to deliver. So I'm just kind of like reeling all of this stuff off, because what I want you to know is we have been able to choose what we work on and how we work. We also break up with clients that don't treat us right. I'm going to break up with a client next week because too many times that she's like shouted and, you know, just been like completely unreasonable with me. We don't go for work that we don't believe in, but there is a balance, and I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. So slide 12, how we survive. B-side, this work ain't easy. So I don't want to make this work sound like it's really easy, because it's not. I never say that we're flat structure, although some of my colleagues would say that. I say that we're trying to be flat structure, but there is always hierarchy and there is always power in the room, depending on who is there and the context and the experience. Yeah, so I don't want to make it sound like I work in some sort of utopia, because I don't. But for me, it is really, really worth it. And I don't know if I could work anywhere else anymore. Slide 13 kind of touches on the amount of time, effort, and love we put into exploring how we talk to and treat each other. We've like spent more time on this than I think people would even consider reasonable. But the point is, it's always a work in progress, and there's always stuff coming up. There's always stuff on a personal level, and then on social levels as well, like, you know, using the pandemic as an example, like the amount of stress that people have been holding in their bodies for the past 2 years, and how that comes out in like everyday interactions is going to affect the way that you work and the way that you speak to others, and just trying to like make space for that and just, you know, acknowledge it and notice it. Some people do just want a boss to tell them what to do, and that's fine, like if that's who they are and if they really, really want that. But we found that not everybody can work with us, because it's almost like they want somebody to like be, you know, checking if they've done their work and this, that, and the other, and that's not how we do it. Unlearning ways of working is really difficult. So people kind of bringing in like just treating each other like an arsehole because like they want to feel powerful and stuff like that. Like there's no place for that where I work. But you can kind of see some like people, especially new people, like come in when almost like they're a little bit thrown off, because we're like, no, none of this is a trick. Like this is like really how we're trying to work. We don't have the resources to do everything, especially as a small organization. So we do have a balance of commercial work, and we have a bit of a Robin Hood model where we take from people who can afford it and use that to fund projects to people that cannot afford it. So the PNGI is example. So I'm getting distracted by people like, yeah, redistribution, exactly. Basically, we charge people, we have like 2 rates, first of all. So we have like a commercial rate and a friends and family rate, and we're open about it as well. We say to people who can afford it, like, we're using the surplus from these projects in order to fund other things, and if you're not okay with that, then we shouldn't be working together. And also, if they're like, no, we're not okay with that, but we're okay with like surplus going to CEOs, like that's also not okay. But there's like recently a conversation come up around who we're working with, and like a kind of like difference around that, and some people not feeling comfortable with work with certain foundations and stuff like that because of where the money comes from. And I do have the opinion that for me the Robin Hood model fits, because if we don't do the work, someone else will, and they won't spend the profit in the same way that we will. I've already mentioned this around bringing new people in can be dangerous. And I also mean that because when I say stuff like this to people and like how we work, they can get this idea that it is a utopia and like they're going to come in and everything's going to be perfect. And when they find that it's not, they get quite disillusioned, I guess. And it can kind of turn into blame really, really quickly. And in like full honesty, I'm kind of in a tricky situation with someone at the moment where stuff hasn't really worked out how they were imagining. And it can be like, it's also, I have to watch how I respond to that as well, and not be defensive and just hear where they're at and hear that like I have power, when at a time I really didn't consider that I had any power in this organization. And that leads me on to saying, when it goes wrong, it can go really, really wrong. It can hurt a lot when you're working with people that you love and that have hurt you in some way, or when there are like differences that people just can't seem to get past. So yeah, it's all work and it's all difficult, but I actually prefer it, and I prefer it being open in this way. I've got just a couple of slides to flick through and then I'll be done, I promise. Just a couple of things that I've learned, especially in the progressive space as well, that I just think I really want to say out loud, because I think sometimes there can be like a reluctance to work in certain ways, because like we don't want to be like, I don't know, like too organized, or to even me with these slides, I was a bit nervous because I was like, oh, is that going to come off really like annoying? But basically slide 14 says ambiguity quickly leads to hierarchy, power, confusion. And this is something that I heard from a course that I did on NEON, which is a new economy organizers network. And some people like thrive in ambiguity, and normally it's where the people that have more power, because like, you know, they can kind of do things and not really get like caught, like they don't have anyone to speak to, but if somebody else does it, that's not okay. Like they want to have no rules, so there are no rules, but really you can't do this, that and the other. All of that ambiguity is just not the way to kind of be running a business, basically. And that leads me on to slide 15, which says decentralization requires process. And this is just so that we all know where we're at and we have the structures to work in the ways that we want, but everybody has access to those structures. And I come back to this a lot, because even, you know, the ambiguity of stuff, things not being documented or clarified, like even little things like that, if we want to work in a truly free way, then we do need process to allow us to work like that. Slide 16 is just covering something really quickly, which has really transformed the way we work, which is consent-based decision-making. So basically we work on the basis of a range of tolerance rather than personal preference. And this, like, I could have done the entire talk about consent-based decision-making and what is wider known as sociocracy. And I'm just going to bump up, actually. I'm going to change the order of some slides as I speak. But basically, if you go on to slide 17, it will say good enough for now and safe enough to try. And that's the mantra of consent-based decision-making. And it's a process that we practice, as well as the structure that we have organized our business. So slide 18 is just kind of showing this pie chart of like the process being consent-based decision-making. It works using rounds a lot. So like we always go in the same order of speaking. When we're in a physical space, we sit in a circle so we can all see each other. When we invite decisions by proposals, it means that we can ask clarifying questions. we can react to them quickly, and then we can ask if we have any critical concerns. So that's basically where the consent lies. And if people do have critical concerns, we work on a proposal to make something better, to make the proposal better. And those critical concerns are usually based on people's experience and people's knowledge. So it's kind of like honoring experience and knowledge, but just letting everyone have a voice in the decision if they want to. But this is also a way to structure an organization as well. And there's the kind of third part of it is learning. So constantly learning and making small changes rather than like throwing everything out of the window and starting again and not quite knowing what's working. So the structure of our organization is on slide 19. And it's basically showing all of these circles. So these are the circles that help the business run. And all of those little dots represent people. They might be the same people across a couple of circles, by the way, because the organization is quite small. But basically, what this means is that every circle has the responsibility and the domain to make decisions around their area. So for example, design circle makes all of the decisions about design for the company. And if you want to be involved in that circle, you can go get involved and you can consent to the proposals that come in there. But if you don't, you're basically abstaining. So you're saying, I trust you. I know that you've got all the design in the company, like you go ahead and like do your thing. Tech circle, for example, I'm not involved in it because I'm not technical, but I trust them to run the business because like they've got it basically. And I've been in basically all of these circles apart from tech because I have the freedom to get involved in what I like. And then I also leave the ones that I don't enjoy so much or I kind of grow out of or that kind of thing. And then the last one, and then I'm going to be quiet, is slide 20, which is planning is as important as action. And I'm saying this to you partly as a person who has project managed, is the most reluctant project manager you'll ever meet. Like I never ever thought I would be able to be a project manager because I just didn't think it was me. But one of the key things that I've learned is that if you want anything to go well, planning it is so important. And I think a lot of the time there can be an emphasis to just get moving and start, but you just take a moment to plan and you'll be all good. And so many things can come under planning. So like working out roles and responsibilities, like don't assume people know what they're doing. Don't assume somebody is doing something because it's their role. Like just take a moment to write it down, designate it, distribute it, consent to it, and then move forward. Document your expectations. To be honest, document everything, like if you can, within reason, right? But just have places where people can access information. Work out what done looks like. So one thing that is done to me is not the same as someone else. And like even with my partner, like he'll be like, yeah, it's finished, or like, yeah, I did the washing up, for like, you know, silly thing like that. And I'm like, but why are there like pots and pans everywhere? He hasn't put stuff away. Like, do you get what I mean? So it's like done on a very simple basis can be interpreted as something different. But when we're talking on a collaborative level and like you have to send something to a client or like something has to be ready on at a certain time, you all need to know what done is. Make small changes frequently rather than large changes. It's easier to measure, it's easier to test, it's safer for you. Pay people for their work always. I know the world that we're living in, and I don't want this to sound like a flippant remark. And I know that capital is not accessible to everybody. There are other ways that you can pay people, but just be mindful of the kind of exclusivity of being able to do free work as well. And I think that's another thing that comes in a lot of progressive spaces, that because we're like, you know, fighting for the cause, we're expected to work for free. And if somebody can afford to pay, then they need to pay. Welcome differences. This can be really, really hard, but being curious about differences and honoring it and using it to make your organization, collective, project, whatever it is, better. Like differences can make things better as long as we respect each other and invite a difference. If we're just trying to grind each other down to make our own decisions or push our own agenda, it ain't going to work. Take time to work out how you'll deal with conflict before it happens, and don't shy away from it. If there's conflict or there's something happening with you and someone else, like just try and find a way to work through it with them. And this is on a collaborative basis. This is so important as well, because it's mirroring this thing around differences. Like differences are such a strength in teams. But if we can't work out our conflict, then you know, like we're not really allowing difference to coexist. And the last one is just to take care of yourself, because this work can mean that a lot of time we sacrifice our own care and our own peace of mind. And we can't do that. We have to look after ourselves individually before we can love anyone else. And I constantly try to bring this back to the worker co-op. I have self-exploited before because I believe in what we're doing. And I kind of take a moment, I'm like, no one's exploiting me, I'm exploiting myself. Like, how did this happen? But it does. And it doesn't mean that you love something anymore because you're working crazy hours, or, you know, you're not telling people how many hours you're working and you're not getting paid and that kind of stuff. It just means that you're not going to be able to do it in the long term. Okay, I made it. So my last slide said questions, preguntas, like, let me know where you're at. I don't know if people have a hard stop now, but I've been working to this 7 p.m. And then the last slide, in case there are no questions, is just in solidarity with all the workers and all the things, because I think solidarity is the most important thing in the world. My email address is there as well, in case you ever want to get in touch with me about co-ops. And I will answer you if you get in touch with me now or like in 6 months or a year's time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kayleigh. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your work, and your insights with us. It's such an honor. We have a lot of inquisitive minds here, so I'm going to open it up to everyone. Any questions for Kayleigh? Any reflections or comments?
Or differences as well. If you're like, you said something and I don't really think that's okay. Like if you feel comfortable, then please let me know.
I actually have a question. So you were talking about, you know, these spaces being a way of, the worker cooperatives being a way of reimagining how we do work together, and how there might be a tendency to kind of romanticize the reality of those spaces, and to kind of to think that, you know, we're living in utopia because we're part of this worker cooperative. So when there are kind of, you know, conflicts, when there are tensions, when there are kind of incongruences between, like, you know, the kind of theory of working together in a kind of democratic and equitable way, and the ways in which, you know, we're all fundamentally human, right? And you were talking about power dynamics, right? Like, even though we're trying to do things differently, you know, like, we still live in a kind of a highly kind of colonized, patriarchal, capitalistic world, and these structures reproduce within us. So when we kind of, you know, gather in any space, there might be a tendency for that reproduction to take place. So, and that kind of leads to conflict in many ways. So how do you kind of manage that and navigate that? Like, do you kind of bring in external bodies to help facilitate? Or, yeah, like, what is the process?
So we had, like, there were like little things that we brought into the process, like having like a check-in at the start of every meeting and a checkout on the way out, and like that check-in and checkout being like a sacred space where people can't interrupt you and they can't comment on what you've just said. So it's for you to be able to really say where you're at. And particularly like with some people come in having a great check-in and the meeting will be, it will go awry for many reasons, and the checkout is a way to kind of give instant feedback. We also have stuff like the X card, which one of our members is like he loves board games, and he brought this up in like thank you V, that in like the board game community, you can basically, if you're role playing, you can have like an X card, which is like a hard stop, like I'm not comfortable with what's happening, and like we just need to stop and I don't want any questions asked. Or you can offer information, so we use that in meetings as well. But then also just a kind of general, because of this practice that I talked to you about, like putting in so many hours over the years, or even over like months, of like having a safe space to give feedback. We use non-violent communication as well. So having like clear ways to tell people like where you're at, and also like naming your needs. Like this thing as well, like the world that we live in is that we're so infrequently asked what our needs are. And it can be really hard to articulate your needs as well. So we basically have quite a lot of frameworks that are like the kind of theoretical thing, the theoretical side of it. But really for me, it's about building up trust with people as well. And sometimes, like, I'm the kind of person, and if you know, if one of my colleagues was sitting here, they'd be like, yeah, she is like this. I'm the person that is okay to like name the awkwardness in the room, but I understand that not, and I'm like, I've always been like that. It's not like I had to warm up to being like that. Like I will come in and be like, oh, this feels weird, or like, what's going on here? But that's just who I am, right? And I know that not everybody is like that. So it's kind of like, and it's also to what I want to say is that just because it works for us doesn't mean it can work for everyone. So it's kind of, I think about like understanding and learning more about whoever you're collaborating with, and then finding out this thing around like what is in people's range of tolerance, like what are the ways in which they are willing to give it a go, because not everybody is up for this work, and that's okay, but it's better to know sooner.
Thank you so much, Kayleigh. Yeah, I guess there's a, and you kind of alluded to it in your presentation, there's a lot of labor even within you know, kind of the worker cooperative space, right? And I liked what you said about process as well, and process might not be like sexy or glamorous right, but it is necessary, you know, to make sure that, you know, we hold each other and ourselves to account.
And it's inclusive as well, that's the thing. And like that's the main thing for me, that when I realized that actually it was helping distribute power, I was like, okay, I can get into this process stuff. And it's funny because a lot of people started to refer to me as like as process oriented or process driven, and I'd be like, I do not see that in myself at all. Like in my outside work life, like I've never considered myself a fan of processes, and I wouldn't, but anything that can help decentralize power, like I'll give it a go.
Thank you, Kayleigh. I just wanted to say it was really interesting and helpful hearing about your work. Like, I am currently living in a housing cooperative, which is different, but obviously in the same vein. And it's, to be honest, been a real struggle for a few different reasons. And like just hearing some of these frameworks are really helpful for me. But I guess, yeah, I wonder like how the difficulty is that now I'm at a place where I'm like, I don't think for me in my life right now it's worth putting any more energy into this specific setup, and like and to have the care I have to remove myself. But that's the whole point, was for collective working and collective, and so I almost feel guilty for like individualizing myself, which sounds, it feels even weird to say, but like how, yeah, like how do we navigate the fact that these are a labor, but we also want more people to like, and like, yeah, I don't know.
I think we are like telling the truth about the amount of labor that is required is for me like the first thing, and the second thing about it not always being easy. Like I know from not from personal experience, but from close friends about the kind of like, it's almost like housing co-ops are like worker co-ops, but like almost like on steroids in terms of like the capacity of what you can do, but also like how intense it can be and all the things that can go wrong, because you're literally, you know, you're laying your head down every night there, right? Like it's not like you can just take a breath, and like relatively speaking, and I think it's absolutely fine as well to be like, I can't do this anymore. And for me it's also like, on what terms are people allowed to leave? Like we have an open door policy, so if people leave, they can come back, they can go learn, they can go do their thing, and you know, and we hope they come back. So it's also like, what does that kind of like breakup look like as well? But I have full solidarity with you as well, because I have this like and that if you would have talked to me 5 years ago, I would have made all of this stuff sound so romantic, but I know it's not like that. Bye.
I feel like I've gone through that in like 5 months. Like I came in with
Right.
a dream, and then now I'm like, okay, no, this doesn't
Yeah.
work. Yeah, so thank you.
You're welcome. And also this acknowledgement as well is that as soon as we are, if with like one human, stuff gets difficult, right? So if we're working or living with other people and saying like, just be yourself, like bring your whole self and all of these kind of things, like we can't like go into that thinking that, oh yeah, this is going to be really easy for me. Like it's so hard. And I know that some of these places, like I've definitely worked, and I say this like fully acknowledging that I'm being recorded, and that if one of my lovely colleagues wants to watch it in future, they can. Our environment has been so toxic at times. It's been unhealthy for me. And it's also like how I like take my step back and look after myself. So in your case, if that's leaving, then like that's good, that is good for you. And in my case, it's just like me getting out of it and just like, and also just not thinking about work all the time, because as much as this stuff is important to me, like my whole thing that I haven't said at all is like, I don't even think work should exist. Do you get what I mean? Like I think we should be living 7 days of leisure in full honesty, but that's not the world that we're living in right now. So if I'm working, then I need to find a place that I kind of abolish work. But I want to find a place that I can at least feel good about giving my time to.
Yeah, and I think there's, when you were talking about, these spaces that ask of us to bring our full selves, our vulnerabilities, the nuances of our being into those spaces, but then they can't necessarily hold
Mm-hmm.
complexity of who we are. Like there becomes like this huge like kind of conflict within ourselves, right? Like, hang on a second, I've been asked to do this thing, but this thing that I've been asked to do isn't actually being held, it's not being received. And then I guess there's a way in which we can like associate those spaces, that whether that be kind of activist spaces or any kind of radical or progressive space, with a kind of contradictory like ethical politics, right? So how do we kind of, I guess, shift that? How do we shift that tendency? And I guess, like you were saying, how do we then kind of say, we would like to do this, but we can't always achieve it? Do you know what I mean? That kind of honesty and that transparency. And in a way, it makes those spaces look less romantic, which I guess is part of the lure of them, right? But then it's being very pragmatic and realistic about what those spaces can give you. And it's interesting because sometimes you might feel more held and heard in like spaces that aren't actually that radical. Do you know what I mean? Or like people whose politics aren't necessarily aligned with yours. They might actually have the kind of emotional capacity to hold you in your complexity, right? And it's those kind of tensions that can be really frustrating, but also overwhelming as well, right? Because you kind of, someone was talking about, our malleability as human beings, right? But when you're kind of, you think that you're in a space that can serve your needs in their entirety, but unable to, like, how do you come from that, right? What's the afterlife of that?
Yeah, I remember being invited to I can't remember what they called it, convergence or something, and they were like, bring your full self, ask all the questions. And then when I was like bringing my whole self, they were like, not that much. And they were like, oh, too many questions. And I was like, well, what's going on here? Like, you told me to do this. And I was othered so quickly. Like, there was a little crew of us, it was our safe crew, and like there was about 40 people and like 3 of us. And I was like, okay, cool, like this is where you're at, and these are your kind of ways of moving. That really they didn't want that. They wanted to kind of like bathe in their like middle class greatness. And I was just like, I was having like existential crisis of like my parents being immigrants and not leaving everything that they had for me to go sit in a fucking peach forest and like have a fake Greek agora. Like I was like, this is not okay. And like looking around them, and they're like, oh, they were so into it. And I was just like, this is not how we're going to change the world. Like, but yeah, sorry, I think there's a little bit of trauma still hanging on in there.
It's so real though. And before we were talking about, like, you know, the performativity of a lot of these things, and like, you know, and how that can be confusing. Actually, it's the performance, the charade, that kind of that creates a sense of confusion and perplexity and chaos almost. But I guess, you know, the more kind of, the more we move, the more we find ourselves in different kind of spaces, the more our kind of spirit of discernment gets tuned into, like, whether people are moving from that space because that is what they intend to do, that's what their spirit is telling them to do, and whether they're just performing it, whether it's some fake deep shit, which we're seeing a lot of, you know.
Yeah, and the elitism of it all as well. Like, I think the way the politics in this country for such a long time was so inaccessible for so many, like left-wing politics, because it was just so selective, and like it wasn't inclusive at all. And just kind of like having that moment to realize, okay, this is what it's about. Because, like, you know, you want to get involved in things and being like, oh no, I have to have gone to this school still, like, you know, like these kind of like patterns and like parallels that emerge, which for me is like transcends like any good, really. Like no good of it can come of that situation when people are kind of bringing that ego and that kind of selectivity into it.
100%. I'm just a bit mindful of the
time. Yes, me too.
Did anyone else have a quick question or reflection, a smile to share? Someone's sharing her smile.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, honestly.
Kayleigh, thank you so much for bringing yourself, for sharing the incredible work that you do, for kind of, elaborating on the process of it all, and for kind of speaking to how important that is as well. You know, when we think about like revolution, you know, and radical political movements, you know, the destruction of all these different systems of power, like, are amazing and incredible, but also there's a procedure, right? There's like a process to all of this stuff, you know, and I think that can often be silenced and erased. And very often it's women who are doing that work too, right? And there's a film that you introduced me to about women's role in the revolution in Nicaragua. And it's just it's so important to kind of to presence those other narratives and those otherwise possibilities, right? And to also show that these things are difficult and hard as well, right? But I think there's something about, you know, the trying, that spirit of trying, and I guess that hope that things can change and that they will, and that's the future that we're kind of trying to live and embody in the present. Which is a beautiful thing to like to carry and to vibrate to, you know. So thank you for bringing that vibration, those many vibrations,
Thank you, everyone,
to this space today. Such an honor, and hopefully we'll see Kayleigh on June the 16th in Hackney at Pedro's Youth Club.
Really excited to meet some of you in person, not all of you. Thank you.
Big love, Kayleigh. Thank you so much. Big love to everyone. Have a beautiful evening. Stay hydrated and enjoy cream.
Love cream. Bye.
Bye-bye.